then there was like a very senior person from Airbus, and that person was also part of the judges. And he said, this is not a good idea. This is like not necessary. Nobody needs this. So we basically ended up not winning any prize, which made me laugh a lot years later when basically a year later Airbus became our first big customer.
Space is humanity's greatest laboratory. Defense is democracy's strongest shield. And today, in workshops, in laboratories, in startups, a new generation rises, not to observe history, but to write it, where every innovation above drives progress below, where every breakthrough in defense preserves our freedom to create. Behind every breakthrough stands a founder with a story. Now these stories emerge to light the path for those who follow. Welcome to Rockets and Radars.
Hey, Marco. Before we dive in, let's get comfortable together and let's get into your super interesting story. You went from a weekend hackathon to building a company that transformed how engineers collaborate across industries like space, automotive, and others, while being acquired even before reaching Series A by Altium. I want to understand the person behind this journey, the highs, the lows, and everything between. So let's get into it. Before we get into your story from the very beginning, I would love to understand and I would love to ask you if you could give us a quick description of what Valispace is, mostly for people that might not know you yet.
Sure. So Valispace is an engineering software. We help companies build better products. Basically, instead of using Excel spreadsheets and documents and copy paste, that is the state of the art in companies that don't use a modern system, we have like a collaborative engineering system in which all of the engineers work at the same time on the same data. So the short term we've always phrased this is it's the GitHub for hardware.
Even before you started the company, you were working in the classical space industry in OHB, working on Europe's largest satellite program. I would love to get into your head, into your memories, to explain us how was it and what were you doing before you started the company or before you even thought about starting a company?
So basically, I was working as a satellite system engineer. I got very, very lucky, basically. I came out of school and I liked the idea of or out of university, and I liked the idea. I really wanted to work in the space industry. But then at the end of studies, I found, there's actually not so many jobs that you could, as an entry position, actually get into space. And then by really lucky accident, I applied to OHB for a position that required 5 years of experience. And I applied with 0 years of experience. And they had been so desperate looking for 3 years for a person that they were like, okay, let's give this new guy a shot, which I felt very like humbled and happy to be there, right? And I worked with an incredible team on Meteosat third generation. We were building Europe's next weather satellite. It launched about a year ago. It's a geostationary satellite. I think it's a 2 billion euro project. So really, really big project. This is actually the time when the idea of Valispace came, because as we were developing, I came from university and I had this idea, great, like I'm going to come here. That's the experts in the space industry. They've made all these great things. So now I'm going to learn how the sausage is made. And it turns out that the sausage in space is actually made by people using Excel spreadsheets and documents. Like we had 7 years before launch, we had 20,000 official documents and 300,000 unofficial documents on our server that were describing the spacecraft. Obviously, these documents are not coherent, right? Because in one place, you might see that the onboard computer weighs 5 kilos and the other one, it says 6. And then one team goes and uses simulation with one and the other one with the other. And the amount of rework and the amount of time spent in updating documents and finding the right information and trying to like make this a coherent thing was so mind-blowing to me. I thought there's all these smart people. If they just had a system, and my other background was software engineering, I did some software engineering like in university, and I said, if they just had the same way of how software engineers collaborate, they will never say, hey, can you send me the latest version of this function so that I can copy paste it into my code? Like this is not how anyone would work, but this is how we would work in hardware, in space. So this is where the idea came from. And basically the next step was to figure out, okay, why is my company so bad at this? And then I found out, it's actually not my company that's so bad. It's actually the industry so bad. And why is the industry so bad? It's actually not my industry that's so bad. Actually, everyone who builds hardware is doing it like this. And this is where basically this deep urge came in from my side, and to say like, okay, there must be a better way.
You always thought that you would create a company, or did it just came out of a real frustration and frustration out of not having any solution for this problem?
So it's a mix of those things, right? So my dad was a ceramist. and he would do water fountains. And as a kid already, he would take me to his expositions and fairs, and I would stand there and help him. He's a one-man business, basically. He does everything. And I would be there and like helping him sell the water fountains. I would be at home and doing like getting a bit of extra pocket money by doing the receipts and things, right? So I was always involved in that kind of world in a little bit. And then later, in university, I joined the program called Manage and More at the University of Munich, which was a program for people who potentially are interested in entrepreneurship. So I did learn things about entrepreneurship before, but I never had the idea. And I said, okay, it's not worth to do another food delivery startup. Like I'll get a real job, like, and then maybe one day if I see an opportunity, then maybe I can go for it. And this was then the place. It was like screaming into my face, basically. Here's the opportunity. Now it's time to do it.
You had a good mix of ingredients in your skill set. So I love that, how you took advantage of that. Let's get into the very first moment, which actually sparked the idea of creating a company. So you had a very big frustration at OHB. How long it took to get to Startup Weekend Space, where it all started?
So I had the idea 2014, and then basically I was already tinkering with the idea, like making some drawings and thinking about it, and even starting some weird coding. Like I tried to like look at what's the technology to build such a thing. So I was looking into these things, but it was very clear to me that doing this alone would be impossible, right? Like I really needed people, and I tried looking around, but there was no one around me with the same kind of interest and drive and so on. I was wondering, where do I find co-founders that are like also interested? And that's a difference, right? Like if you live in Silicon Valley or something, there's a lot of people around you probably, but if you live near Bremen, and then there's smart people, but not necessarily smart people who want to start a software company with you. And that's when I then read like, oh, there is a Startup Weekend Space coming to Bremen. And I was like, this is insane. This is exactly what I've been waiting for. So I was really, really interested into that. So that was like early 2015, and I said like, okay, cool. This is the place where I will probably find other like-minded people. And that's what exactly happened, right? I went there, I like stood there, told people, hey, this is what I want to do. I basically want to abolish Excel. That was my pitch. I want to abolish Excel engineering. And well, there were people standing around. I was able to convince them to come into my team. And this is the unlikely story of how we basically became like a founder team, because usually startup weekends are nice places, but then you never hear of companies that actually come out of it. Interestingly, out of that specific startup weekend space, even now, 10 years later, there's still 4 companies alive that were created at that time.
And how did you choose your co-founders, or did they choose you? Was there any chemistry, or was it because of what you were thinking to do, or why did they choose you?
So I was standing there and I was presenting, let's abolish Excel engineering. And I was sure before that's how sure I was, my idea was great, that people would just come and everyone would want to be on my team. And then basically it was not like this. There was like one person who was standing there and who wanted to be on my team, and the other were all unsure. It was like, no, this is my one chance. So I went around, talked to people who were still unsure, and was telling them like, hey, look, right, this is a great idea. What do you do? Don't you want to join my team? So actually, my co-founder Louise, who ended up doing the company all the way until exit with me, was there. And I told her basically, she was a bit undecided. And I was like, look, this is an amazing thing. Let's work on this. And yeah, I basically talked her into it. Then she joined, and then we were like 6 or 7 people in that initial team. So it was not the full team which would later found the company, but it contained the right people, and that was the most important.
That's strange then, that there wasn't that much of an interest.
I mean, there were other things, right?
Interesting.
Like you could build, I don't know, satellite constellations. There was a startup idea for in-orbit manufacturing. There was one for, right? Like you had all of these other great things, right? So it's just, do you want to work on this software idea while other people are working on like rockets and other things in their weekend? So this is, I think, the trade-off that
okay, totally makes sense. If you can take us through the experience, how the Startup Weekend Space went, can you get us to the very beginning?
So we were brainstorming, and I mean, you have like, what do you have? Like 70 hours to basically do everything, right? A business plan across all the different domains, blah, blah, blah. smart as we were, we spent around 8 hours debating the name of the company. So out of the 70 hours, we took like a ton of time to just discuss the name. And then we were like, no, we actually should actually do real work, right? Like, shit, let's get to this. But we couldn't decide on a name. And at some point, out of the blue, Louise hadn't said a word until then in this discussion. And she just said, Vali is a Nordic god of revenge. That's it. And then there was silence. And we're like, and we're taking revenge from Excel engineering. And it's like, okay, done. That's it. And this became Vali, which later became Vali.space, which became Valispace. So, and this is the way
Oh,
how
that's
Louise,
awesome.
my co-founder, operates a lot, right? Like she isn't necessarily the one speaking the most in the room, but when it then comes to it, she actually does that. And that's why we clicked so well.
So once the event was over, or once you went through the brainstorming phase of the implementation phase, what did you end up with?
We had like this rough business plan, basically, right? I mean, in the end, it was a slide deck and we were supposed to present. So we went up to the stage and presented. And again, we were very sure, right? Like this was great, right? Like we had thought about so many different aspects. We had done research. It seemed so obvious that this was a huge market opportunity. So I went on stage and presented, and then basically there was a lot of judges and they went delivering out. And later we heard what happened is they were actually thinking of placing us first or second first. But then there was like a very senior person from Airbus, and that person was also part of the judges. And he said, this is not a good idea. This is like not necessary. Nobody needs this. So we basically ended up not winning any prize. We were in fourth place, which was basically not any of the prizes, which made me laugh a lot years later when basically a year later, Airbus became our first big customer. I think the reality is that's probably one of the lessons learned, right? Like all of these startup competitions, they're good to get exposure. They're good to get some feedback. But in the end, what matters is customers and where they put their money. And I think you should neither get really excited because you won 10 startup competitions, nor should you get very demotivated because you didn't win any. It's not really a signal for success. I think in the early days, I would often mistake those things. And in reality, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what those judges think. It even doesn't matter what investors think very often. Most of them will be wrong. It doesn't matter. What matters is really, does a customer put money on the table for the thing that you've built? And if they did, people will come around and later be your biggest fans and congratulate you and tell you that they always knew. But in reality, skepticism is what you are going to be faced with in the beginning. And it was probably a good lesson learned to get started with being pulled back from this idea. Oh, it's going to be easy. It's so obvious, right? And it gives you the right reality check. Oh no, actually, there's a lot of work.
I think skeptics are actually great because then you need to try to convince them. Or you shouldn't try to convince them, but you can use the feedback that they gave you for the future iterations, right?
This is true, but what I also learned in my startup life is you will find a lot of people who want to give you advice. And most of the advice, if it doesn't come from people who've actually gone through something similar, is wrong and it's bad. And if I learned something is, yes, you should listen to critics. Yes, you should take their views seriously, but especially and probably 1,000 times more if it comes from someone who has done anything similar to what you're doing. So has built very complex software, well, get their advice on software. Has built a company, well, get their advice on who to hire and how. But if it comes from a person who has not that background but has worked in a big company before, their advice will actually guide you the wrong direction.
That's a great advice. I need to think about it also, who I ask for advice now, because it's a trait that you want to get as much advice so you can actually create an opinion. But if you ask the wrong people, then you are going to be even more confused, right, at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get back into the main timeline. So you just pitched the startup weekend space. How did you get to establishment of the company? How long it took and how did you get into that point?
We all had this amazing weekend and then we said, okay, cool. This was great. We should really do something with it. Let's meet up again in Germany and actually like work on this, right? And this is where we started losing the first people on the team, obviously, right? Because they thought, oh, that was a nice weekend. I'm not going to travel again and spend another weekend and so on. So we ended up being 3 people. That was Simon, Louise, and me. And the 3 of us, we would be the ones who would actually like continue with with working on this. And so we would meet up almost every second weekend in one of our places. So Simon lived in Belgium, Louise lived in Portugal, and I lived in Germany. So what we did is every second weekend we would fly to one person's place, spend the weekend there coding basically, mostly coding, and then we would go back and like have our normal day jobs. And this was an interesting way because startups always have this very weird moment in the beginning. Basically, if you talk to anyone, you talk to customers, they say, yeah, sounds like a great idea, but I need the product first before I can give you money. You talk to investors and they say, well, that sounds like a great idea, but I want to see traction with customers first before I give you money. And you're like, well, but I need money to actually build this. So you are in this very weird situation. And every founder I know had to find some weird way around this, right? Some strange way of like bridging this. And it's never as straightforward as people tell you, yeah, you just go to an angel investor, he gives you the first money, then you do. It's never like this. You always have to first do the impossible to then be able to get into that stream. And the way we did the impossible was basically we worked nights and weekends while having our day jobs. So the day jobs kept us alive. We worked nights and weekends. And that took us almost a year, basically. So startup weekend was 2015. And then 2016, we had the first time a customer who wanted to give us money. It was then that we created the company. We said it's not worth having like an entity before. So let's create like a company the moment somebody actually wants to wire us money. And this is what we did. We created the company then. And this is when we had also a conversation around how do we want to split up the shares and things like this. And it was a very honest conversation on who wanted to go full time, who wanted to actually contribute how much. And so we had that conversation, wrote it down on a piece of paper. And it turned out, for example, Simon, our third one, didn't want to go full time at that time, right? He said, I'm a space engineer. I want to bring my spacecraft to space, which I'm working on, which is a great thing. So he stayed on, but like in a different way. So it was Louise and me, and we decided then to go full time. So we basically created the company, and then if you start to already reduce a bit the time at work, and then at some point we went full time and basically decided to like go ahead with all of it.
Okay, first customer. How did you get them? How did you find them? And how did you convince them?
So this was an interesting one. We went, so you will see this as a repeated story, right, of overconfidence. So we were overconfident and we decided, okay, we'll go to this ESA conference. So there was an ESA conference in Spain. And so we decided to, while we were still working full time, to take days off from our holidays, go there, fly there, it's like spend the money, participate in this conference. And our idea was we'll go there and it was a conference about system engineering and databases and so on, right? And we thought, okay, this is our place. We'll tell people we've built this great system. This is how you should do engineering. So we went up to stage, we gave our pitch, and then everyone applauded a bit, right? There was like maybe 80 people in the room or something like this. And then people would say, how refreshing, such a different view. That's an interesting one. And then they all went their way. And it was like, this was it, right? Like we just like, this is what we worked for a year now. And this is the reaction we're getting. So one of the funny things is on the way back to the hotel, there was like actually one PhD student and he asked interested questions. So I was like telling him about this and so on, what we were doing, how we were thinking about it. And he was interested because he was working on his PhD thesis around like collaborative engineering and so on. And so we went home and I remember like Louise and we were walking together and we said like, well, this was devastating. Like why did we even come here? This like, what did we expect? I mean, it's so weird. And it took a few months and I get an email in my inbox from a Russian email address. And it says, hi, I'm actually going to be working soon as a vice president at Airbus. I need your software. And this sounded like the worst scam. Like it sounded like the thing that you would never like. But I mean, we were desperate. So we were saying like, there is a chance that this is not a scam. So let's just continue the conversation. And then not much later, actually, that same person wrote back with an Airbus email address. And he was a VP at Airbus. And it turned out that this was the professor who was guiding this one PhD student. And he was actually tasked for Airbus with a new CTO office to find a way to accelerate their engineering efforts across the entire organization. And they were looking for a tool to implement the methods that they had been studying, and there was nothing on the market. And they were like, okay, you guys are apparently the only ones who are like thinking that direction ahead. So they asked
Mm.
us like, make us an offer, and we were just cocky. We just put a few $100,000 into an offer, although we had like barely like some prototypes. We worked on weekends in a small team of two people or three, and they took it and they signed a contract with us. And we basically took that as a starting point to really build the software. So the reason why this was possible, and there's maybe one step back, is we were already at that time, we were a few months full time by that time. And the reason we could do that was just because we got friends and family money before. So we basically were able to go out of our day jobs, work full time on this because we had been whining about this problem for like a year or two and telling people every day, everyone who wanted to listen or didn't want to listen, we're telling them what we're doing and how we're going to change the industry. And I think at some point, people in our family were like,
Mm.
yeah, just shut up and take my money, right? Like, just go do it. So we got really lucky, and this basically allowed us to work full time.
Oh, oh, super interesting. Actually, I actually wanted to ask you, like, when did you decide to ask friends and family for that? But I guess it was out of the desperation. Leave me alone. Here you get the money. Was it like that?
It was really the point when we said, okay, we created the company, we wanted to get investment. The first talks with investors just told
Mm.
us, there's no way, right? Like, we don't give you money unless you have customers. We said we cannot give you customers unless we build a product. So we knew we had to go full time. It was not enough to do this on weekends.
Mm.
And this is where really friends and family stepped in and gave us like they gave us convertible notes, right? So I found on Y Combinator website like a contract and I gave it to them and they signed it. And they gave us some starting money and it was really amazing because I told everyone like just give us money if you can fully afford to lose this because 90 something percent chance you're just gonna lose that money. And well,
Mm.
these people, they said, we don't really understand what you're doing necessarily, but like we believe in you. And so here you go. Just go and try.
How much of a product have you had already when you closed the first customer, by the way? You mentioned you had a prototype, but what does it mean having a prototype? Did it work or was it only a front end that looked nice?
No, it worked. Like we had a way of like storing actual engineering data. We had built a calculation engine that could calculate properties along them. So
Mm,
like
okay.
the core things that up until today make one key part of Valispace was there, right? There was actually like all the concepts of how do you connect engineering data? How can you with multiple people work at the same time on that data? How does it automatically propagate to all the systems? That we had built. So the core technology.
If you knew what you know now, how would you get your first customer?
Same thing. Same thing. Same thing. I mean, you need to create chance to get lucky. That's it. I think that's if I learned one thing in my startup life, it's you cannot know what comes. You can only create chances to get lucky. That's all you can do. If you never create your company, you cannot get lucky. If you don't go out and if we hadn't gone to Spain to pitch, we couldn't have been found, right? It doesn't mean that
Mm.
every time you go to Spain, someone will find you and you will get an Airbus contract. But if we hadn't tried, it wouldn't have worked, right? And so we tried a million things, right? Like we tried calling up people, going to industry conferences, talking to people at ESA. We try to like, there was a million things. It was just, you do all of these things and then there's this one thing and you get lucky and then you take it from there. And I think you have to build things, right, as much as you can with your own capabilities, right? So we did it with a day job, then we did it with the friends and family. Later, we did it with the money from the Airbus contract, right? So we continued building our things so that we would be able to get the next customers. But that's the way. You just have to do things and then try to create opportunities to get that.
Awesome. Okay, so you had one contract, you just got money from friends and family. What happened after? How did you get into the next milestone?
So now we obviously leverage Airbus contract to now get the investor because suddenly you can tell an investor like, hey, look,
Oh, yeah.
right, like Airbus is a customer, right? Like we're really good. And suddenly investors are interested, right? So all those people who before ignored you very, very candidly and said like, that sounds like a great idea. Come back when you have something. Suddenly everyone was interested. But even that was not so true, right? Because people were interested, but space was still a very weird domain. People didn't know what this
Mm.
was. So even if you pitched investors, they would be like, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting. I have no idea what you're talking about, so good luck." And I think that's also one of the things we learned. Investors do like to invest in things that they understand. And there's just not so many people who do understand space. So if they don't understand something, then what they do is they take financial KPIs as a proxy. So what this means is, okay, I don't understand what you're doing, but I see your growth. I just believe there's something behind this. But if you don't have this, right? And I mean, getting one customer is a big thing, but how big is that market? Can you get somewhere else? And so on. These are all things that you need to know the industry for. So we got very lucky. And Christian CF, who was like just fresh at HTGF, at High-Tech Gründerfonds, he was a space engineer before. See, he had actually space engineering background and was just starting to invest for High-Tech Gründerfonds. So when I pitched to him, he was like, "Oh yeah, I fully get it, right? So it's an obvious opportunity." So I really think it comes down to this. Like again, I pitched a lot of people to get lucky to find him, but it could only have been him at that time to really see the potential that this could have. And this is how we basically also got our first investment round. So yeah, this is how we basically closed 1 million in VC.
Christian from High-Tech Gründerfonds was also at the startup weekend in 2015 when everything started. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's not the first time I had met him, but I think I met him there. But then the actual conversation only happened later when we were actually able to show that we had
Okay.
done something. This is what I mean, that everyone is interested until the point of being interested, until you have a customer that pays.
But still, it's crazy, right? The luck level here in your story is very high. I just love that. That was the only person that could invest, and he did. I love that story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but again, it's the opportunity to get lucky, right? I mean, for this to happen, and I think this would always is wrong when you tell these founder stories, right? The founder story is often like, look, I got a lottery ticket. Here's my advice. Pick the numbers 7, 24, and 18, and you will get it, right? That's not how it works, right? In reality, what you did is you played 100 lottery tickets, right? Like we were talking to lots of people. We were trying to get customers in lots of ways and so on. What we tell is the one story that worked, and this is why it seems so unlikely. But then, like there was probably 100 other ways how we could have gotten there, right? Had we won the startup weekend, there was some initial money related to it that might have given us exposure to get the next step. We did, right? Had we, for example, I did a lot of traveling and talked to people at the agencies. Had someone picked it up and was the right person, might have gotten an ESA contract and done it this way, right? So there is these million ways how it could have worked. Sure, the one thing that we got very lucky, and I absolutely. But you had to do all of these things to get lucky.
Okay, cool. So you got 1 million euros in seed funding from High-Tech Gründerfonds. What did you do with the money?
Yeah, I mean, we had to build out this product, right? Like we were in this Airbus contract. There was like big expectations on actually delivering something. So we had to build it. And we tried to find like developers who would join like this weird small company that was like doing something very unknown, right? And we didn't have, although 1 million seems like much, if you're trying to like build up a big team because you had to build all these things, that's not much money that you can spend on everyone. So you have to like convince them through other means. You have to give them some shares. You have to tell them the story of where you want to go. And so we found people who believed in us at that time. And Louise was very smart at the time. We didn't know, should we hire them in Bremen or in Lisbon? And then basically she had this great idea. She said, oh, let's just see where people, like we'll just open the job position both sides and we'll see where people go. This is how we ended up building a company that had 2 people in Germany and 33 people in Portugal. Because Lisbon, Bremen. So we found a lot of people.
Opening the net to luck, right?
Exactly. So we had a lot of smart people in Lisbon who basically were like, oh yeah, I want to do coding. Space sounds amazing, right? Let's do this. And they came with their experience and they joined us. And this is basically where we used the money.
How did you approach hiring your first 5 hires? What were you thinking about? What were you looking at? And what was your way of thinking?
So we couldn't afford to pay the good people. So what we had to do is we had to find people who were like raw diamonds. We had to find people whose CV was not very straightforward and who would not have an easy way of like getting into a normal, well-paid job, but who would be amazing at what they were doing. So all of these other companies that do go through the normal way of hiring, they would overlook them basically. And in our place, they would be fully valued. So we took people, I know, right? Like one of the marketing managers still today at Valispace, right? He used to be a bartender, right? And then he went to marketing, and he's a great marketing person. So, but that's not someone that would get a marketing job in a big organization, right? And we had this with a lot of people. So we took a lot of bets on people, and it was mainly looking at them specifically. Are they capable? But especially, what's the rate of how they're improving, right? Do we have the feeling that this is a person that give them 6 months and they'll be like doing amazing things? So we took a lot of junior people, and they would basically just go ahead and do amazing.
Let's get further in the story. Let's get into a year 2019, which was the moment where you decided to expand beyond the space industry into automotive and other sectors. What were you thinking back then? Why did you decide to do that?
You remember I told you, like, we got the Airbus contract, and this was the starting point for getting investment. Again, this sounds like very straightforward, but in reality, it was not straightforward at all, right? So what happened is, actually, a few days before we were signing the investment, Airbus called us and said, like, actually, we had some changes. We're not going to use your software anymore. So we were about to sign a contract that was like built on that we had that other one. And so what we did is we flew down the next day. We were in Toulouse, and we basically overnight did a big presentation that we built, and then we basically pitched to them how we would change things and make things work. And we came out of that 2 days later, and they said, we want to use your software even more, right? So we had these cases where we had to basically bring them back, and that ensured us the next investment. But what happened after some time, so we had the investment from HTGF then. Airbus CTO left Airbus, basically. And all of the organization of the CTO office was basically like changed. And this is basically where our big contract that we had, that we were thinking as would take us to the next step, was taken away. So we basically had to restart thinking what we would do. And this, when we changed the approach entirely, what we did is we said, okay, before this, we thought, okay, we get Airbus. Now let's go get Thales. Let's get Ariane and so on. This was our plan. Now we had nothing. And so we had to basically say, okay, we had 2 small startups that were using Valispace. And this is when we were saying, okay, let's do it the other way. We just have to go to all of these small companies and convince all the modern new space companies to use our software, right?
Wow.
Like, they want to be fast. They directly see the value. So this is what we did. We basically got a lot of customers, right? And then what we then did is we found, okay, new space is just so big. So the software was built from the get-go with the thought that it should revolutionize engineering as a whole. We never thought of it as a pure space software. It was always meant to basically help companies across this. And this is how we then also started to get into automotive, into other places. So it was basically, you were starting to look at other companies that also had the similar problem. And so, for example, Volta Trucks, which was building electrical trucks, became one of our biggest customers at the time. So it was all these companies that needed to build something very complex in very short time, and were just not able to find any good tools. So they would take a bet on us, basically, and would bet their engineering processes on this new software. And so the pivotal moment was not so much of a, let's go into a new industry. It was more of a, let's, instead of trying to do top-down sales, let's go some bottom-up sales, really go to the people, travel there, meet them in person, do things that don't scale, and then start to convince one first person in another industry. And then you can tell the next one, well, we're not the space. We have actually one person in this industry and in this industry. And then you get to the next one, right? This is how we would build up our customer base.
That's a great approach. And then you got the BMW as a customer later
We got them,
on that journey.
exactly. Like we tried basically then to go through acceleration programs and so on, right? Like, again, you had to do a million of those things, and we got them as a customer, and later we lost them as a customer for other reasons. And like, it's never as straightforward as you would think on paper, basically. What happened in reality is that you had to spend a lot of time, and this is maybe an interesting one. So, for example, we had Volta Trucks and BMW, and it was a very different way of working with either a scale up that needs to build things very quickly, incredibly technical, and a very established big company that needs to also build complex things. And it's a very different way of working with those kind of companies. So people asked us in the beginning, so do you want to do like small companies or do you want to do the big ones? And the advice from everyone was just focus on one. You cannot do both. And we on purpose said, no, we want to do both. We ignored all the advice and decided to go both after small and big. And what that allowed us to do is to build a software that was not useless to companies once they grew, because we had also built use cases for the more complex things. So you were able to actually do engineering from any small team in a big company, a big team in a small company, whatever you wanted, right? And you would be able to help them. I think that was one of the key decisions we took against all the advice out there.
If you look into both small businesses or startups versus corporates or scale-ups or established companies, what is the biggest difference of selling to each of those? What would be your playbook on how to get each of them?
So a small company, right? You will find a person. These people are excited, right? Because they're excited about their job. They're excited about what they do. If you tell them I can solve your problem, they'll be excited. And they'll bring it to their decision maker, which is usually immediately, in our case, the CTO, right? Like so you would immediately be talking to the person who can make the choice. You would show them. These people would still be technical. They would understand what you're doing, and they would decide, but they would have no money. So oftentimes they were pre-funding or in the middle of it or something. So you would have that challenge, right? So you would have the challenge of showing that you provide enough value so that they would spend significant part of the scarce money they had on your software. From the big companies, it's different, right? In the big companies, you talk to somebody who has interested, but then in the company, nobody knows how to buy your software because nobody in the engineering space has ever bought a new piece of software. So basically, you have to navigate the whole organization. Who is actually able to take a decision? So it's really like you start mapping out people and like really building diagrams of who's who and who could basically have which influence. And there's this department, so you start having tons of meetings with the different departments and the different stakeholders and so on, mapping it out. And then you have to try to get all of them to like somehow agree to actually do some paid pilot, because you need them to put money on the table. They will try things for free, but then they don't know who can actually pay for it. So you need to find a person who can actually open up their purse for something that they have never budgeted. It was right, like, and then they would say like things like, "Oh yeah, we already closed the budget for next year, so come back in 2 years." And I mean, in 2 years, my company is dead, right? So this is it's not viable. So you had to find weird ways in where someone would be, "Yeah, we had this R&D budget for better engineering practices. We'll just take something here," right? Like, so you needed to find those champions that would actually like
Champions. Okay.
do the non-typical thing inside these companies.
That's a good summary here. Okay, great. So before you got into the next funding round where you got 2.2 million, which was in 2020, how many customers have you had and what was the state of your product and team?
So by then we really had everything like in place, right? Like we started to have like this, we started to have actually in different Airbus contract and the BMW contract, we started to have like a growing number of people. You could really see like it was starting to take off, where more and more companies would come and would actually start getting inbound interest. Like startups would come to us and be like, "Hey, we heard," for the first time, people would come to us and be like, "Hey, we heard that you actually have given to this startup your software. We want to learn more." And this is where you need the next funding round basically to, right? Like bring more people into your team, make it bigger. But you could see that takeoff motion basically. And this is where we got to convince basically Joint Capital and Hardware Club, and told them like, look, right, again, these were people who knew industry, who understood what hardware meant and so on. And suddenly you could have like those people and say like, okay, yeah, that's a bet we're taking. I think you've shown us that this is more than just like some idea in your head. And with that proof in our pocket and good customer reviews, right? They would call up our customers and ask them like, do you like this? And then they would say, yeah, this is like an essential piece of software for us. And this was enough for them basically to say like, okay, we'll fund you.
Okay, interesting. So regarding this funding round, have you initiated by yourself or was it that Joint Capital approached you and that's how you ended up with those talks?
No, like, I mean, funding rounds for us were always an uphill battle, right? There's this saying in VC where if your company is good, then fundraising is easy. Everyone else struggles, right? That's what they say. And I think it's almost true. Basically, like if you're the darling, then people run to your doors. But if you're a normal startup, you'll just have good numbers and good things. But there's a lot of other startups that have this, right? So you have to make your case. So it really became a very structured effort. We really looked at which are the, I don't know, 100 potential investors that we could talk to, start scheduling tons of meetings with them, explaining our story, right? And like continuing those conversations. They ask you for a lot of information. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And then you have to orchestrate them to all come at the same time to a decision so that they start feeling that if I don't invest now, someone else will take this deal from me. And I think this fear of missing out is something that as a founder you have to create. So in this case, we managed to basically show, hey, this is like a hot thing. It's taking off. Do you want to be on board or not? And that's basically where people said, yes, take my money now and go do something great with it.
How different was this round from the round before when you got 1 million from High-Tech Gründerfonds? What was the biggest difference?
I always have the feeling when you understood how to raise one round, then the learning very soon becomes useless because the next round is raised very differently. So the first round is on storytelling, right? It's like, here's the story. This is what we believe. Here's some indicators in the market and so on. And the second one, yes, you have to do storytelling, but people are like, what are the numbers? What are the growth rates? How much are you spending per customer? How much are you earning per customer? Customer lifetime value, and so on. So suddenly it becomes a thing about this. The next round that you're raising afterwards becomes about like, what are your metrics around retention? What are your metrics around how much does it cost you to get a customer? So so every time that you learned, you're like, oh, I understood this now, it's useless because the next round is basically very different. So you have to start from scratch and really understand at that stage of the company where people are investing, what do people want? So even though we only went through 3 seed rounds, if you want to pre-seed and 2 seed rounds, every round would be different. And I think this goes on as you do Series A and other rounds. It's every time a very different game.
As we go further in their journey, I would love to tap in your head again and understand how did you approach product development feedback loops. So your product has evolved over time since the inception. Later, after the run that we discussed, which was actually 3 years after, you launched ValiAssistant, AI-powered engineering assistant, which I think is great. I think it's groundbreaking for the industry. I'm just curious to understand your head, like how are you thinking, how long your feedback loops were, and how are you getting feedback from the users?
So we always try to be very close to the users. So it was always like we wanted to really help them get their things done. And one of the most important thing was to like be close to them, look over their shoulders, help them put their use cases into the software, right? And as you were doing it, you automatically saw shortcomings yourself. And so when you're trying to solve it for them, you're like, oh yeah, true, right? Like product lines is a thing. So you basically start to get you gather all these problems, try not to listen too much to their solution ideas. Like it's good to have them, but you're trying to generalize, right? So what we would do is we would get all these individual feedbacks, and then we would step back and figure out what would a solution look like that basically covers a subset of these, right? Like that is more generic than what they're asking for. So the solutions we would implement in this case would always go around that kind of view. And I think another aspect to it is we always had strong opinions loosely held. What do I mean with this, right? Like we in our case, when we started Valispace, the first thing I said is I will never build an Excel plugin, right? Because Excel spreadsheets are the devil. The first plugin we ever built was an Excel plugin, right? And the reason for this was because people said, well, I have these legacy spreadsheets. Can I just somehow incorporate them? We helped them do that. The next thing we said was, we'll never build a requirements management system. There's just too many out there. Yes, they all are very bad and very user unfriendly, but we don't want to get into this game, right? And then people came and said like, okay, it's nice that I can store in Valispace what I am building, but I should also store what I want to build, right? And to have that connection. So the next thing we did is we built the requirements module. And then the same thing happened actually with AI. For many years, we said, AI is just a buzzword in our space, right? And then fast forward at the end of 22, basically ChatGPT comes out, and it became so obvious that, especially if you do requirements engineering, there's a lot of language in there. And language really matters. It matters to be precise. You need to be able to break down requirements into more details. There's a lot of things that you need to do around precise language and requirements engineering so that your product is actually good. And when we tried it, we said like, I got this feeling, oh, this makes total sense. Like this is the place where things will change. So I think that was a pivotal moment. So I went to my team and I told them like, look, right, like we're gonna actually a big amount of things that we were planning to do, we're gonna scrape them, and instead we're gonna build the ValiAssistant. And my team was skeptical to say it in a positive way. So they said like, right, we already have our hands full. It's really hard times right now with a lot of things that we want to do. And now the CEO comes with this idea that he wants to put some AI stuff on top. But after seeing a bit what was possible, they found it interesting. They started to commit. And then our team basically 3 months later, we were on the market. We were the first engineering software in the market that was using LLMs. And this was the thing, right? We really went executed. So that's again, right? Strong opinions loosely held. So people said like, oh, that's not for us. And then when we found it is for us, we actually went ahead, did it. And I think that allowed us to show to the market, look, right, there's a modern way of doing engineering. So a lot of people came for the AI pieces, but then also discovered all the other things that we were doing. So it became a boost for the company because we were able to show off all the capabilities of Valispace. And I like to say it was like the tip of the iceberg, right? We had the big iceberg built already. So it was not, oh, let's do something, but we basically used all the underlying capabilities that we've built around requirements engineering, calculation engines, and so on, and then tipped it off with the IPs, which was able to basically go into all of these foundations that we had built. And that was really a moment which we could shine.
There's one thing, which is the ego, and there's the other thing, customers screaming for solutions, and then you step down, step back, look at the problems, try to generalize them, and then go into the development. That's super, super interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And this approach really paid off. By mid-2023, you had more than 1,000 engineers across diverse companies using Valispace, and that's something amazing to say. One more thing before we get into the acquisition, the most important part of the whole journey. Within this period, around late 2023, you got another funding round, around $3.7 million. Tell us more about it, and I'm curious if you have any highlights or any advice that you would love to share.
I mean, we were at this time and we found like things were going really well, right? Like we started to have all of these kind of customers. It was like we were growing. So we really wanted to take the next step, but we were not yet Series A ready, right? Like we didn't have like at the time, you had to reach like roughly the 1 million ARR milestone to be able to like run the Series A, but times were changing, so people were also asking for more, to see more there and so on. And we said, okay, this is a good time to tap into our existing investor base. And basically, they were all on the boat. They had seen what we've been able to do. And then they said, okay, let's double down on this, right? And we got basically joint capital to put in extra money. They actually had people from their fund that wanted to do some extra. And so we basically put all of these people together and said, let's take advantage that this is a moment in time in which like the company is going fast and we now have the chance to really make it succeed, right? And it's a good thing, but there's also downsides to it, right? The more money you take in general, the more money you take, the higher the expectations get of what people want to get out of it. If you just read the news, it always seems like an enormously positive thing. The more people raise, the better. But there is
more money sounds better, right?
Exactly.
And more people write about you because it sounds cool, but it has some downsides too.
Exactly. And I think so every founder should probably watch, in general, the series Silicon Valley, which is a great one because it actually portrays a lot of things the real way. But there's one specific scene and the founder, he sits down with another founder and he's in a bar and the other founder is so destroyed and everything went to shit. And then he asks him like, but why didn't you just take less money, right? Like, why did you like go for these high expectations? And the other one says, I didn't even know you could do that. And then he really gets, and then when he starts realizing, oh, okay, all these expectations became, and all of these, the growing and this and this and this, all of these come together. I'm not saying as an advice to founders, take less money. I'm just saying, don't think of it as a very obvious way that the more you raise, the quicker, the more people you hire, the better, right? Like in the end, you need to find the path that brings you most quickly to results, basically. And for example, keeping a team small without lots of layers in between allow you to move much faster than if you start building up a lot of intermediate layers and so on too early. So it's always a trade-off.
Thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's get into the acquisition. February 2024, Altium acquires Valispace. What was the moment when you decided to sell? When did you start to think about, and how those discussions began in the first place?
So the first thing is, I think you have to be very clear. If you take venture capital, your investors look for an exit. So your company is set up to have an exit. 90% of the time, this exit will be you going bankrupt, right? That's the most typical exit. And then out of the other 10%, I think it's 90% of those which actually sell, and then 10% which IPO, so go to the stock exchange, right? So your most likely scenario after going bankrupt is to be acquired. And I think when you take venture capital money, you just need to be very conscious of this. This is part of the life cycle of a venture capital business. So in that sense, it crossed our minds. But in comparison to some other people who then start thinking, oh, who could acquire us and how will it look? And should we look good for acquirers? We put this aside and we said, okay, we want to grow. We want to create value for customers, and that time will come. So we did that. And we were not yet in the thinking process of, oh, we probably should look for acquirers. It was Altium which reached out to us, right? And they said hey, look, we just happen to be in Europe. Do you want to meet? Because we're building this software, which is called Altium 365, which is this broad software suite for all kinds of engineers to develop hardware. And we really like how you approach requirements in a smart way, and you have all of these capabilities. So how do you, can we have a conversation around this, right? We had a conversation around this, and it seemed to be a very good fit, right? They had all these electronic engineers who were building things on their platform, but a lot of those didn't have formalized requirements management systems, but were struggling with keeping the requirements in check. And so we had a conversation, and we said, okay, let's have a conversation around partnering. And this was what we started with, right? So we did a bit of a technical integration. And then we'll do a deal in which we will do some revenue sharing, and you promote the software, and we help you basically with the technical part of what we are able to do. And that was a great starting point. And they started to advertise this then on their own channels and found that it got a lot of resonance. There was a lot of people who were interested in this. And as we were building the integration and starting to work together during the negotiations, we were looking at the contracts, and I started to say to the person on the other side, some of the things that you're trying to do here look more like what you would do after an acquisition. And then they said, well, maybe we should be talking about this. And I said, okay, maybe let's talk about that. So my mindset has always been, I said this before, creating opportunities to get lucky. So what I saw this as is just okay, let's start a conversation. You never know where this is going, right? And so we had the conversation what this would look like, and actually flew to the US to meet them, and we got to know each other. And then it became clear this was a company, Altium as was a company, was growing very quickly. And it became clear, if we want to exit at some point to someone, then to a company that basically drives things, right? In which you can in which you don't become one small cog in a well-oiled engine, but in which you become an integral part of this way of accelerating, in the end, the future for engineers. So since this was our vision in the first place, and they were on a mission that was similar but a bit bigger in scope, we thought it was a good idea, and we want to go for this. And this is how the process began, and we found a win-win situation of how to make this work. And yeah, after almost a year, then total, the things were basically signed.
Is there any specific advice that you would love to share to founders that are maybe thinking about being acquired or are within the process of acquisition?
So I think first lesson, but that's probably also the lesson everyone who has ever fundraised had, is it's not done until it's done, right? There's a millions ups and downs, and things happen. And fortunately for us, it all worked out in the end. But I do know founders who've gone through acquisition processes and who then at the very last mile, things got stopped because management changed, something like this, right? So I think you need to keep as long as possible all of your options open, and your things open. It also helps you with your negotiation position, right? If your company keeps growing, it just is accumulating in value all the time, right? So it is hard because as a CEO, you have to like focus on fundraising or you have to focus on acquisition. But during these processes, the best thing you can do is have a company that's doing really well because that shows the value and puts the pressure on the acquirer or on the investor in the other case. So I think that's really, and for me, the most important piece of advice. The second probably being you need to know what you want, right? Like what happens often in negotiations is you go with the flow, and as things happen, you like start yourself thinking, is that what we want or not, or something like this. And in the acquisition case, we did it really well. We sat down before, Louise and me, and we wrote down together, this is our red line. Like this is what we want to get out of this, right? And this is important to us. This is not so important to us. And this helped a lot during the negotiations because you knew exactly where to steer things. You were able to find those win-win situations, and in the end, that allowed us to bring the win, right? So, for example, it was very important for us that the whole team would come along and that they would basically become part of the new company, right? Like we said, if we do this, we want to give everyone the opportunity in this new place to like also thrive. And if you have this in the back of your mind, you go in with a very different mindset into conversations and you know when to say yes and when to say no.
Awesome. Amazing insights. I think like just to summarize the whole journey, I would say luck management and expectation management are very important.
Yes.
To run any type of company in this industry. And this is super interesting. I never thought about it like that. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, cool. Now I'm very curious about your future. Have you thought about what is next for Marco in the short or long term?
Well, in the short term, I am part of the Altium organization and we're driving electronics engineering and we're driving, since all products in the last 10 years have become mostly defined by electronics and software. And this is like the key thing that defines a product. I think that's an exciting point to like move and be able to like help people build those products in a better and faster way is something that drives me. Then on the long run, no idea, right? Could be that the bug of creating something myself hits again. But which direction or what, I'm still, let's figure this out over time.
Yeah, that was what I was tapping into is that do you miss being a founder?
I miss a lot of things about being a founder. There's a lot of things I don't miss at all about being a founder.
What those are? I'm super curious. If you just there's one thing that you don't miss, what it will be.
So one thing that I don't miss is waking up at night sweating because of the fear of what's going to happen with your company, your people, and so on, right? Like I think the amount of stress that you have in a big company as an employee, like it goes until here, it's like that's fine. As a founder, it goes all the way to the stomach. It's things that you do care about. You do care about in an extreme way, and it's all on your shoulders. In the end, as I said, all the mistakes are yours. Well, that applies to things, and if your company is like not succeeding, and this has impacts on your employees, it has on your team, this is because of you, and you should have taken better decisions, and you should have thought better. That amount of weight that is on your shoulder is not. I mean, it is great because, right, with great power comes great responsibility. The Spider-Man quote there, but it is a feeling. So it is a feeling of power to a certain degree and a feeling of agency. But if you do that for 8 years, and it's not easy, right? And those are the things that you will probably hear from a founder of a beer, but you won't read necessarily in articles on the internet. And these are the times in which you wake up and you're wondering, like, why am I even doing this? We don't even have a chance. And then you have to like turn it around. And I have 2 small kids, right? But they were born in this time of starting this company. And you have all these insecurities around that, right? You have your own, you have your company that is like trying to grow up. You have 2 kids that you're trying to be there for, but they also grow up, and all of this happens at the same time. And I think that amount of weight on shoulders and pressure is something that, although I was able to endure because of all the great things of being a founder and all the things that I loved of being a founder, I'm not unhappy to have a small pause from for now before entering something like this again.
No, I think it's definitely healthy. As you say, there's a huge upside to being a founder, but a huge downside, and it's so big that not many people realize that until they go through it. Before we get into the last section, which is Quickfire and questions, I really need to ask you one more follow-up question on this one. Would you have any specific advice for founders that are listening that might be in one of those lowest points in their founder journey?
Yeah.
Either they don't get commercial traction, or their runway is 3 months, or they are really not feeling good and maybe even think about quitting.
So I think what was most important to me is to have, in my case, was two people I could really rely on. One was my wife, and the other one was my co-founder, right? And I think that's not something that you start building up when you're in a low point. It really means to have a support system somehow around you of people who really understand things. Because if you go to someone else and they have no idea what it is like to build a startup, they will not understand any of the things that you say that are like bugging you or how much it affects you. They will be able to nod along and be nice to you, but that's it. So being able to have some kind of a support system of people around you who remind you of, or are able to ask the question, but why are you doing this? And so on, and be able to bring you back on track and basically take you out of this all crap and rather get into the, okay, what do we do about it now situation. That really helped immensely, right? And I think the other piece is moving the goalpost. So what happens a lot is, at least for me, I always move the goalpost. So when I started the company, I told my wife, I told her, look, I really need to do this. I really want to start this company. I have this passion. I want to try. And I know it's going to fail. I told her, right? Like the most likely 99% of the cases it's going to fail, but I still want to give it my best shot. I just want to try. So give me 2-3 years, I told her. And I just want to try, right? And then 8 years later, I'm still in it and it seemed to be succeeding, right? But when I had like very difficult times, let's say year 5, 6, something like this around that time, it was really important to think back, right? I said in the beginning, I know it's all very unlikely. I just want to give it my best shot. I want to try. And look where I've brought it, right? Right now, there's already customers. There's like all these things that are unlikely already happened. So I think one very important piece is to look back at all the things you have achieved so far. And I started to see everything else almost like if you play video games, like the bonus level, right? I said, I already won the game, right? I already managed to get all the things done that I wanted. I built up a company, it started to have customers, we start to have a team and so on, right? And now whether we achieve still that other thing that I also want is still nice, but it's a bonus level, right? And this means it gives you a very different mindset if you start seeing what you've done so far as an achievement and you're now doing something else. And if you try to move the achievement goalpost always beyond where you are, because you can move it infinite, it will make you very unhappy that you haven't reached it.
I wish I heard this one a while ago. Thanks for sharing. Super inspiring. Okay, cool. Let's get into the last section of the episode, and this is quick fire round questions. So how does it work? I will ask you a few questions, and if you can answer with a sentence or two, that would be amazing. I'm very curious what you think here. For technical founders thinking about starting business in either space or hardware or deep tech sectors, what do they need to know? What is the one thing they need to know?
There's this saying, people will say it's impossible, and then someone came along, didn't know that, and just did it. That's what you need to do. Don't trust people who tell you it's not possible.
Yeah, that's a good one. Building in Germany versus other European hubs, pros and cons, and what country would you choose if you would start again?
I would say what matters is get people that are passionate around you. It doesn't matter where they actually are. Ideally, you're co-located. The more you're co-located, the better. But there's lots of smart people in Europe, so do it where you find the smart people.
What is something that everyone gets wrong about either space or hardware or engineering industry? Something that sits in your mind?
I think what people get wrong is how much they think that technology matters a lot, right? I think that process matters a lot. I think that if you want to, like the fact that we built a space station with like so many people and all of them have to do it, it becomes impossible with current processes. If you want to build, basically in short, if you want to build really interesting things, I would spend so much more time on getting the engineering processes right of how to get there. And I think that's something that's an afterthought for most people.
The next 5 to 10 years, what excites you the most about where the space industry is heading?
I think there's going to be an interesting consolidation phase, right? You had all of these new space companies, and then there's like some kind of a consolidation phase. I think what excites me the most is what comes next, basically after that phase, right? I think the interesting thing is what's the kind of ecosystem that will emerge. And I think while everyone was thinking very narrowly in the past, right? Okay, we do CubeSats for this, we do CubeSats for that, and so on. You'll start to have actual space industries, multiple, with dedicated players, with dedicated newcomers, with dedicated and so on. So I'm interested in this new space economy that's actually forming with these different industries.
What do you think is the status and future of the European space tech ecosystem?
I think the status is one of catching up, right? It's clear that we're not the leaders right now. I do think, though, there's no reason to be catching up today anymore. I do think that there isn't. Capital has become more global, talent has become more global, and especially capabilities and knowledge that were very limited to certain places are also far more accessible. So I do think we should reach as like the space economy should like people here should reach for being the leaders in places. They should not reach only for also doing something what has been done in other places before and just make the European version of it. But I do think like leadership is possible if people aspire to it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, some people think that, oh, we are going to make the best company in Spain or in Portugal, but the ladder is so low, and then you look into the global perspective and you are not much better as them. So that's a good one. Okay, cool. Thanks so much for taking us through your journey and through the insights. It has been very inspiring, to be honest.